There's a reason why every single person, this is a huge part of what I do, is I say, look, every generation's made. No generation makes themselves. So you being mad at people for being exactly who they were designed to be is a waste of your time and energy. So perfect example, people complain about millennials and their participation trophy. Well, all you 60-year-olds that are listening to right now, you're the ones who bought those participation trophies, right? So you don't get to walk around now and say, we watered down the version of excellence by giving people trophies for being the worst player on the worst team in the worst league in the city. And then now we're going to completely change the word excellence and expect people to magically know what our version of excellence is. No, you did that, right? So you're going to have to articulate what excellence is, what you're going to have to say it more clearly because we changed what it meant.
Hi there, and welcome to the HR Podcast. This is Linda Misegadis
and Cyndi Manuel, and we'll be your co-hosts. After spending years working in and with HR, we thought, why not start a podcast to support the important HR community? We believe the way things have always been done isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. So we're diving into topics that support HR and working women as they navigate the future of work. We're talking about professional growth and also how we can support each other as human beings.
We can't wait to bring you insights from HR experts, thought leaders, and inspiring women who are making a real difference in their organization and communities. They'll share their journeys and tips on balancing work and life in a better way. We're excited to learn alongside you and hope you'll pick up some great takeaways from tips and tricks to worksheets that you can actually use in your daily life. So grab your favorite beverage
or lace up your walking shoes and join us for the HR Her Resources podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Her Resources podcast. I'm excited to be back in the studio with my amazing co-host, Cyndi Manuel.
Thank you, Linda. I feel the
same.
I'm good. I am super excited about the topic because I have a mom who is, baby boomer. I have myself and my husband, Gen Xers. I've got a son who is a millennial and a daughter who is a Gen Z. So I run the gamut.
You got the gamut. Yeah.
So I need some pointers. I'm super excited for pointers from Kristin.
No, I'm super excited about this episode as well. Kristin is travels all over the place. She's got a crazy schedule, and we are so excited that we got to sneak her in for a little time for our listeners. You are all going to love her as much as we do. And if you don't, too bad, because it's our show, and we get to choose our guests. So that's how it works. But let me tell you a little bit about Kristin. I'm going to read you her official bio because it's too funny how it starts. Kristin openly admits that she can't do much or bake a pie, but she knows her stuff when it comes to generational norms and communication, and I can attest to that. I've seen her speak, and she's incredible. She has a master's degree in communication studies, a bachelor's in communication arts from Alabama, and was communications professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville for 15 years. Kristin has a passion for decoding the generational enigma and is known for her straight talk speaking style and wicked twist of humor. You'd think she was from Boston. She has been on stages in 42 states, left her mark in 3 countries, and sprinkled her wisdom across more than 160 conferences for 350 plus diverse organizations. From Fortune 500 giants to pint-sized nonprofits, she's been there, done that, and has left an unforgettable impression. She's obsessed with travel and desperate to see the world, and she and her husband of 25 years tried to enjoy life while keeping their 4 children alive who never stop eating. And if you want to learn more about Kristin, and we'll put all of this information in the show notes, but you can visit her website at www.GenWHY.com. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to be with you, Linda. We'll see if Cyndi's any good or not.
I so appreciate you. I know. The jury's still out. We'll see. No.
I do in a pinch, Kristin. I do in a pinch.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Exactly. Well, this one is a fun one because we're going to talk about generational differences. Can't even say the word generational differences. And Kristin is just so well versed on all of this, but it's her approach. And so, but I'm wondering, Kristin, can you tell everybody, like, when we talk about different generations in the workforce, what do we mean by that? Because, like, when I was coming up, there were no such thing as generational labels, right? There were the boomers, which that was just because they had a bunch
There's
of
so many
kids,
of
right?
them.
But
Mhm.
otherwise, nobody had a label. Yeah, now everybody's got a label. So can you talk to everybody a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
I don't really know where the whole labeling thing came from, but definitely it is definitely a across the board. We like to be able to kind of divide up and be able to look at things. I think a lot of it actually was born out of people looking at personalities, and when people started to really see through things like Myers Briggs and DISC, and you started to see sort of archetypes, and then all of a sudden people were like, oh well, if this works for personalities, then maybe this also exists in a generational space, and it definitely does. There's no doubt about it. What happens during your childhood impacts you the rest of your life. And even if you do mature and grow up, which we all hope you do, there are still nuggets of it that's pretty much going to stay with you for the rest of your life. And that's why you can turn on certain, certain radio stations and know every single song that comes on because it was the soundtrack of your childhood and your early adulthood. And then you can literally go one station over and be like, I don't know any of this. Why did anyone ever think this was good music? Right. So we know that this definitely exists. Toys, pop culture, parenting trends, all of these things come together. And I think part of why we're so fascinated right now is that we've just never had a generation stay in as long. We've just never had anybody stay in it as long as the boomers are staying in it and with no end in sight. And so I think that that's kind of causing more discussion around it because those Gen Xers who quite honestly could handle a lot of the new things that the Gen Zs and the millennials are asking for with no problems. We're still not into the decision-making capacity. And so I think that's why it's maybe intensified a little bit
Mm,
more. And you've got a lot of much older people sitting on boards of directors and wanting to understand where their dollars are going. And it's just so different. And then of course, when you add internet on top of all that, that changes the game as well.
true. Yeah. No, that.
Technical
Why do
stuff
you
for
think the
sure.
boomers won't go away? What do you think is
Oh,
keeping them
It's
hanging
because their
around?
job and their identity is intertwined. It's the same thing. So one of the things that a huge part of what I do, which Linda knows, but Cheryl, Cyndi, you might not have been introduced to this yet. Most of what I do is talk about the why behind why people do the things that they do. Because what I found is when you begin to understand that people are only doing things because it makes sense in their head, you want to punch them in the throat significantly less, right? Which is good because HR says no to throat punching. Okay, but the bottom line is that if you can understand the why,
Right.
especially from a historical perspective of why people are doing things. So, like when you think about the baby boomers, their parents were children during the Great Depression. So that creates a lot of fear around money. Well, then they get off the boat from World War II, as
Yes.
traditionalists do. Kiss mom, make 3 times the amount of babies. That's how you get the baby boom. And they tell all those people that if there is a job available anywhere in this country and you don't leave to go and take it, you're a bad person because at least there's jobs available now. And it knits together that job and identity in a way that other generations haven't had since then. But it comes from a lot of the fear that was really built into their parents' perspective and how they inherited that. Plus, they've had a lot of weird ups and downs economically. But the big thing is that their job is what they do. When you meet most boomers, the first thing they're going to ask you when they shake your hand is, what do you do for a living? Right? It's knit together. And so the idea of ever saying, I'm
Yeah.
not a teacher, I'm not a researcher, I'm not a whatever is a scientist, engineer, hospitality agent. The idea of saying, not having anything to say in that spot, I think roots them in many ways to continue working.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying there, Kristen, and really kind of helps because it is kind of interesting to see just how much and I like what you said there too with the why around the it's so much of it is tied up the identity, right, as to who they are, which is so much different than today. So I'm wondering like then if we think about why do we see so much with like millennials and Gen Z? Because our generation, I think the Gen Xers are, are a little bit different in this whole mix. But with the millennials and the Gen Z, what's their why? Because it is like polar opposite of the baby boomers.
Yeah. So when you start running numbers of how the generations break down, the big thing you have to understand is that the millennials and Gen Zs together make up about 28% of the American population. And this becomes really important because in America, you must have two things to have power. You must have money and you must have majority. And until only very recently, the boomers have only been the ones with the money and the majority. They've run everything. Every advertising dollar was aimed at them, getting them to work, getting them to buy, have children. Everything was aimed at them. Well, then all of a sudden you've got a challenger, right? You've got millennials who have the numbers. They're bigger by about 8 million, in case you're wondering. They've got the numbers, but they still don't have the money. So what's happening is that for the first time in their lives, many of the boomers are being challenged on who's going to have the rules, what are the rules going to be. And so this identity around the millennials really kind of calling themselves something different, and the replacement to some degree has really kind of heated up. They're locked in mortal combat now with who's going to be the ones who are running things. And just in case you're wondering, it's going to be the people who live longer, which would pretty much be the millennials, right? So the bottom line is that boomers have been harder on their bodies. Y'all put baby oil on your body when you were teenagers to lay out in the sun, smoked while you were pregnant to stay thin. You put more preservatives in your body than any Gen Z will ever have an opportunity to have in your whole entire life. But because so much has been aimed very much at this one generation, they don't know how the power shift is happening. And so you find as millennials, especially those people who are in the middle, those elder millennials are starting to make, mid-career money. As they're starting to hit mid-career money, this battle is really, really heating up across the country over whose rules are going to be the rules. And so they just irritate each other all day, every day, just very much in the same way that if you had a child that acted just like you, it would be the one on your nerves. That's definitely what's happening. They know that millennials really are the real threat. And many boomers say, we just got it the way we wanted. We just finally got it. Good. Why you want to come in and mess it all up now? And millennials are like, well, because those rules are 80 years old and they don't make sense anymore. So it's not what this is a big part of what I say is, it's not that one group is right and one group is wrong. Every generation is just playing out what they've been taught and how they're made to be. But I think it behooves people to keep us at odds at one another, right? To keep us not communicating and not being effective. Yeah. It allows you to continue to control the narrative if everybody's at odds.
That's a really good point.
Well, and when millennials came into the workplace, we were going through the Great Recession, right?
Exactly.
So they didn't have the money. I know a lot of millennials can't afford still to buy homes, and whereas that used to just be you went to college, you graduated from college, you got married, you bought a home. It was like all the things that were sort of laid out for you. And then it became very, it just wasn't that way for millennials. So
well, and you also have to remember that millennials are also the highest educated generation we've ever had. They get more college education. And when you have more education, you've been exposed to new concepts, you're going to think about things a little bit differently. You're not going to necessarily want to follow the pattern just because everyone else has followed the pattern before, right? That's the idea of being exposed to critical thinking. Yeah. And so you've got a new generation of people who are now saying, do I really even want to be married? Like, what's the benefit to me to do any of this? What's the benefit? Why I love my parents. I'm cool hanging out with my parents all the time. Why don't we share resources? Like, you have people that are thinking about it in a way that previously so much stigma was popped on top of it. And so I think it's interesting. You really have millennials that I think part of it is because they are so highly educated. And not only that, they also, because of social media, they're exposed to the world in a rate that boomers and even Gen Xers were not allowed to, right? Like, your millennials know that the French get off 2 years for having a baby. Like, they know. So because of that, they know that it is preposterous to only be getting 6 weeks, right, as Americans. And so you have to remember they have this globalized impact that, again, boomers had no indication of this, right? No idea what other people were doing. And Gen Xers really had the smallest amount of controlled information that went through. And now you've got millennials that in real time, Gen Zs in real time can find out what's going on in the world. And so they're starting to question and saying, do we really want to be worked like this? In a way that boomers never even really had the opportunity to consider. And so I think you're running into people who have just been exposed to more, and so they're questioning.
That is so true. Yeah. Well, and so when you think about like where we sit, the Gen Xers, kind of in the middle of all of that, what's our why? Because we're kind of like in that weird spot between all of that. And so talk a little bit about the Gen Xers.
Yeah, it's funny. I tell people all the time that I don't spend a lot of time in my presentations talking about Gen Xers because, quite honestly, we're not the problem, right? I mean, on the whole, most Gen Xers are not going to cause a lot of issues. We're going to come in, we're going to do our job. It won't be pretty. We probably will be salty half of the time that we're there, but the job will be completed. And that's really what we were designed to be, was worker bees. We were designed to not take it, not talk back, not take fluff, don't have emotional, emotions or feeling overwhelmed. And if you do, then just take some Prozac and move through it, right? So this sort of idea of, of just take it is sort of how we were designed to be. The interesting thing that I've found with a lot of our Gen Xers, the number, and Linda knows this, I've told her this multiple times, the number that I see when I do research that most Generation Xers plan on retiring at is 57. And you hear that pretty much across the board, whether it is from Alaska all the way down to the Florida Space Coast. Most Gen Xers will tell you they have no intention of dying at their desk, no intention of doing this. They're already downsizing much earlier. They already have exit plans. They're already going to buy their little $40,000 villa in Italy and get the heck out of this. So we see that very often a lot of the Gen Xers are very much in a let's just get through this so that I can live the rest of my life, quote unquote. And so again, what we see is for a lot of Gen Xers, they don't present a lot of trouble to people. We don't question. Most of us can't afford our house, and so we're going to keep doing the work of 2 to 3 people because we can't afford our house, right? So, and we've got all these stinking kids, and they eat all the time, and so you find that a lot of Gen Xers have that sort of like let's just get through this, and then I'll worry about having a good life on this back part. But I find that many Gen Xers do have this very clear plan, or at least dream of how they exit stage right. Because most of us do. We look at those boomers and are like, absolutely not. I have no intention of doing this at 77. No, thank you whatsoever. But again, a lot of us are not in a lot of the dream jobs, and right, we're not in that spot. So we're not in the big leadership roles. We're not fulfilling our passions. We're still middle managers at 54. So if you never get the high that comes from being the decider, it changes your opinion.
Do you think that's why? Just to expand on that, then, do you think that's why so many? I know a lot of women who are Gen Xers who have gone out on their own. I'm one of them. Because it wasn't as fulfilling in a corporate environment, right?
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. I think you find quite a lot of Gen Xers are in here's what I tell people all the time. Gen Xers were born to be hustlers, right? We were bringing extra Sunkist to the school and selling them at a quarter under the table because we knew that some people's parents wouldn't let them drink soda, right? We've been hustling forever. We had eBay where we were selling our parents china, right, that they told us to never sell. We've been able to have all these we're sort of the precursor to that gig economy, right? And so we find that a lot of Gen Xers, it's weird. When I talk to a lot of Gen Xers, they'll say, I don't really worry about money. I can always find a way to make money. It might not be pretty, but I can find a way to sell something. I'll go work 2, 3 jobs. I'll hustle that money, whatever it is I need to do it. And so you find that a lot of Gen Xers have that perspective. And so I think because of a lot of women in particular, saw that for especially their boomer parents, right, that it was Mary Kay or corporate environment, and that's really your own options. That a lot of Gen Xers said as we begin to reap the benefits of the women standing up, right, as we begin to reap the benefits, that you saw a lot of entrepreneurship bloom out of that. So that hustle mentality plus I'm not doing that same thing that they did just because I have ovaries, right? It changes the way that they begin to act. And then what happens is we all go look at our girls, right? And we say, you don't let anybody treat you bad because you're a girl. You don't let anybody tell you anybody. You don't need to get married if you don't have to. You don't have to have kids. So we're seeing that long-term impact to so many of those boomers really taking that stand in, 60s, 70s, and 80s. But a lot of that Gen Xer, that idea of like, well, I could find some money. Don't you worry about that. That I think that's sort of born out of the heart of many of our mothers cutting coupons and selling Mary Kay.
When I had the conversation with my Gen Z daughter, don't let people push you around. And she looks at me like, of course I'm not going to let people push me around. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh my God, it's amazing.
Thing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Let me tell you, my daughter is the biggest slob in our house. She's fabulously a slob. And it makes my husband insane. But there's a part of me that's so freaking proud that she doesn't feel any desire to clean up over after the other 4 boys in our house. Never. Feels no need for that at all. So, it's a cross in between. She'll help me because she's nice, but she never thinks, oh, this is part of my duty as a female to make sure that this life is more comfortable. And that's real to me. That's amazing that it never even crosses her mind, especially as a Southerner. right? Yeah, and
Yeah.
on top of that,
No,
the fact
I love
she's from the deep South, and we have all those weird rules.
especially as a Southerner,
On
yeah.
top of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, true. That is so true. I'm curious, Christian, from your perspective, like we're in a time when basically every generation is in the workforce today, which makes it a little challenging from a human resource perspective, right?
Oh,
So,
yeah.
Mhm.
like, how can human resources help organizations kind of like, how do you manage all of these generations? Because we all have different communication styles, we have different work styles. So, how do you do that?
I mean, I think the front end of this is that HR reps have to be informed on the information themselves first. They need to know what's going on, what the norms are, what the differences are. You're going to have very hard. What I tell people all the time is there's stuff going on that you think it's just someone being a jerk that is totally a generational norm. And when you begin to understand that this is something that's baked into that generation, you spend less time being mad and more time focused on opening up the conversation and training and having hard conversations. But if you just
Okay.
write this person off as they're a jerk, they're unteachable, they're unlikable, they're, a micromanager, then you're going to continue to have problems. And
Resistance.
that's what we're really looking
Yeah.
for. We're looking for opening the conversation is really all we want at this point. And I love the quote in Ted Lasso where they talk about be curious, not judgmental. To me, that's at the heart of generational diversity, right? Is that when you run
Yes.
into a situation where another person in your generation, in a different generation says something and you don't get it, instead of being like, no, I'm right and you're wrong and you must now be destroyed and forced to conform, that your brain now goes, well, maybe they know something that I don't know. Let's talk about
Wonder
where your
why.
viewpoint stems from. And that's what we're not doing. We're not having the conversations. So the biggest part for HR is
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to help anybody until you know what's generational. And if you've spent a lot of time buying into the stereotypes of every generation and saying all these millennials are so lazy and they're apathetic and they're that or all these boomers are such micromanagers and they won't share information. There's a reason why every single person, this is a huge part of what I do, is I say, look, every generation's made. No generation makes themselves. So you being mad at people for being
Mm.
exactly who they were designed to be is a waste of your time and energy. So perfect example, people complain about
Like that.
millennials and their participation trophy. Well, all you 60-year-olds that are listening to right now, you're the ones who bought those participation trophies, right? So you don't get to walk
Yeah.
around now
That's
and say,
right. Yep.
oh, we watered down the version of excellence by giving people trophies for being the worst player on the worst team in the worst league in the city. And then now we're going to completely change the word excellence and expect people to magically know what our version of excellence is. No, you did that, right? So you're going to have to
So
articulate
good.
what excellence is, what you're going to have to say it more clearly because we changed what it meant. You don't get to be mad at people for being addicted to their cell
Yeah.
phones when you shoved them in their hands and bought them all iPads for their third birthday. We did that. We said, "Hey, little baby, here's a device that's as
Yeah.
addictive as heroin. Hope it doesn't jack you up forever, right? But if it does, we'll blame you. Like you can't do that.
Mm.
Every generation has been made to be the way that they are, and if you'll let people just play their natural roles and be in a healthy part of the team, as opposed to constantly making them try to conform to the majority or the leader, then you'd have much healthier teams all the way around. But if the HR professionals don't know anything about it, they're going to continue to struggle.
That's a really good
It's so
point. So
good.
educate, like, right? Is that education, learn about the different generations and the different styles. So that kind of is a good transition too on the leadership side of it, because as leaders, we all have, different levels. In some cases,
Mhm.
maybe you have boomers all the way to the Gen Zers that you're leading. What's the responsibility from a leadership perspective is all, because Cyndi and I always say we can't put it all on HR. What do I as an individual or what do I as a leader need to be doing as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that especially key leaders and key decision makers in particular, need to be aware of generational norms and desires and wants. You need to have people in the room who are representing every single one of those generations who not only are
Right.
there, but they feel like they can freely speak on behalf, right, of those people. So, one of the things that I see across the country is that you've got a lot of decision making teams that are too heavily weighted on one generation or another. And then they end up making decisions that sound great to their generation. And then they go and present it thinking everyone's going to be in love with the idea. And a quarter of the people are, outraged and are ready to
Yeah.
kick down the door. It's because you don't have enough representation from a generational standpoint. And you do. You need to consider what different people want because we do. We want completely different things. And it's not always going to be feasible, but there are compromises. And then the other thing that I find is very important from a leadership perspective is we have a tendency to always lead based on how we would like to be led. And that's just not the way that everybody else is, right? So like for me, I'm a Gen Xer. Please don't call me on the phone. This is a 7 circle of hell to be trapped on a phone call with somebody. But if you can email me something and I can get it to when I want to, then that's great. But I also know that if I send that same email to my boomer, they're going to come into the room anyway and ask me for clarification. So I might as well call. And that if I send it to my millennial or my Gen Z, they're going to put some weird voice on top of it and think that I'm mad and that they're on the verge of losing their job and they're going to have to live in a van down by the river and it's going to spin out, right? So like you're going to have to think about what other people want and lead them based on the way that best motivates them. And this is one of the biggest problems, again, we see in the country is there are people who are managing too many freaking human beings and they don't have enough time to actually manage anybody because they're also running a full-time job. So you're not going to be able to train, lead, fill in the gaps, help people get where they need to be and grow as the next generation of leaders if you genuinely don't even have time to check in with them over the course of the week. So I would say, time balancing, making sure that that you're advocating for yourself, making sure that you are advocating to have enough time to manage and lead the people that are on your team is going to be important. But, definitely you need to understand that not everybody wants it the way that you do. And that doesn't make them bad people just because they don't like it or want it or need it in the same way. For example, all of us are Gen Xers here on the call. We find that a lot of Gen Xers are not very social people. We just don't have the same needs that especially the 60-year-olds are hyper social, love to hang out, Christmas parties, they're just living for it. And, most Gen Xers could come in and could never go back into the office again a day of their life and be perfectly fine. They just don't have the social needs. They get it from their friends and their family when they need it, and they don't need the social outlet at work. And so it's interesting because you have different generations with those different needs. And now you've got these new Generation Zs, right, who are coming back and saying like, why don't we ever hang out at work? And why don't we have parties? And why don't we ever communicate? And the Gen Zs who would be Gen Xers who would be stuck planning the whole thing are like, because we don't want to hang out with you, right? So it's understanding those cycles and knowing and putting the right people together. Those boomers and those Gen Zs would love to be able to hang out together. But I tell you what I found out, you better bring alcohol if you're going to do that. If you're going to put a Gen Z in with somebody much higher, they're going to need a little liquid courage to get there because they mostly talk here. So the idea of having to face-to-face converse with somebody, you put a little alcohol on them, they can totally do it. But, if it's just stone cold, maybe not so much. But again, it's knowing that people are different. And then also sitting down with your team and saying like, okay, everybody has a different, let's say, preference for how we want to communicate. We as a team need to decide to be what's going to be our number one lever, right? That we're going to predominantly check our email, or we're going to predominantly check our voicemail, or we're going to have a group meet over text. And that's going to be the predominant thing that we're going to check. You need to have that conversation and then check back in 3 months. Is this still the best one that's working for us, or is it time for us to try another one? And so, but we're not having any of those conversations because we're too tired. We're too burnt out and we've doing too many things. And so we're just assuming everybody wants things the same way that we do.
At the Delta Principle, we are transforming the way you experience change. Have you ever experienced an organizational change where your employees pushed back because it was too much, too fast, or they just didn't understand why they couldn't do things the way they've always done them? What about where communication was non-existent or unorganized, with important updates getting lost in the shuffle, leaving people confused? And have you ever experienced change where morale was at an all-time low because the change felt overwhelming and not aligned with your organization's culture? If you are being asked to lead an important organizational change, especially if you're new to leading change, or if you're just feeling overwhelmed, the Delta Principle is here to support you. We work closely with you as a trusted partner, co-creating real-world solutions to address your unique challenges, and we equip you and your organization for future success. Are you gearing up for your next transformation journey, or exploring ways to strengthen your change management skills? Then let's connect. This year, we're thrilled to introduce Leading Change, a training designed for leaders driving organizational initiatives, and Navigating Change, a training tailored to empower teams and adapting to change with confidence. Our coaching and training sessions are fully customizable to meet your organization's unique needs. Reach out today to see how we can partner with you to make your next change a success. You can find us on LinkedIn or by emailing us at info@thedeltaprinciple.com. I love what you're saying there, because we talk a lot about bring people into the conversation who have different strengths than you do. So if I'm an idea person, I actually need somebody who can take the idea and get the thing done. But I love what you're saying, Kristin. Let's have representation across each of the different generations that are represented within your workplace to ask them. And I think there's a lot of ahas that could come from that as well.
Huge. Well, you think about like millennials and Gen Zs are they're so good at sharing information, where boomers have really been trained to hoard that information, right? You don't ever let your competitor know. You never let anybody in your department who might want to try to take over your job. Well, when the internet comes in, you've got the access to the world's resources like this. And so they know about freeware. They know about how to leverage ChatGPT and save you a ton of time and energy. And they have no problem talking to you about that. But if they're never in the room to even say, oh, you realize that you can standardize that and you never have to type up that email ever again. It'll self-send itself every Friday. If they're never in the room to do that, what's going to happen is someone's going to suggest it. And then that person's going to go, oh, well, who has time to do that? And everybody else is going to go, oh, yeah, you're right. We don't have time. Because no one's going to come in and say, there's other avenues, there's other access, there's other things that you can do, because we just haven't been exposed to the tech in the same sort of way and that freedom of information. So if we don't bring them in, we're going to continue to do a lot of that excess work that's just not necessary at this point. You can't tell a whole generation of people work smarter, not harder, and then be shocked that they're working smarter and want them to all of a sudden pretend to fake work for 8 hours a day.
Yeah. And that is such a good point. Yeah, no.
I think also maybe saying, okay, you're a boomer. What do you bring to the party? You're a Gen Z. What do you bring to the party? Because technology-wise, of course, my Gen Zer as a digital native grew up with, the mini computer in her hand, whereas my mom will only use her phone for text messages and phone calls. So, but she has so much history that if we're not aware of how things used to be done, we're bound to repeat it. So there's some value that she's got. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, we talk about that all the time. Like one of the things people ask me, especially when they're booking me, that people get worried about the ageism side of this. Whenever I'm doing a booking, they're worried about what's going to happen. Is somebody going to throw the flag for ageism? And here's the bottom line. I advocate you never hire anybody based on their age, right? That's a stupid idea. It's also super illegal. But the other thing of that is that right now we're in a pivot part in America where we're redefining what the new version of work is going to look like. And so you need people that have multiple inputs to be part of that. So what I say to people all the time is you need boomers in the room because they're going to bring the wisdom. They've been there, done that, come out the other side, cycled through it. You need that wisdom. You need that autonomy of the Gen Xers who are just going to put their heads down and get it done, right? It might not be pretty, but it will be completed. And then you need that agility and the optimism that comes from the millennials and Gen Zs. They've been pivoting on a dime their whole entire life, and they still seem relatively happy to be here. And so we need all three of those big groups as we're redefining the new version. But again, I find very often that there are boardrooms and there are C-suites that don't contain a good mix of generations.
So can you talk a little bit about some examples of maybe some companies who have effectively, that are managing generational diversity effectively? Because I don't think there are a lot of them out there, but some of them are probably doing a pretty good job. And I know you speak to hundreds of companies across the country. So I'm just who are, you don't have to give their names, but are there some examples of maybe some organizations that are out there, killing it?
Yeah. Hey, I'll talk about one that I literally just did a conference for a week ago. It's called VHB, and they are contractors. They mostly work in engineering, all the different engineering spaces. And VHB, when they were founded, they started under the idea of generational leadership, right? That everything, your job, right, the foundation core of that company is your job is to leave the company better for the next generation. And so this has been sort of tightly intertwined with who they are and what they do. And so it was really fun to go and talk to people who are already kind of aware of the idea of generations and making sure that they're really intentional about having leadership programs, leadership development programs. They've been doing this, I'd say, way longer than most government contractors have ever been able to do. But they're focused on this idea of not just making sure that you're making money, but making sure that you have sustainability as an organization. And I think that's really impressive. I think VHB has done that very well. Other companies that I would say have had some interesting things that I like. Gosh, let me think. I mean, I work with a lot of government people. I think UKG's obviously done some pretty cool stuff. So I can't say enough good stuff about them. But I think that the hard part is it's easier to say the negative than it is to say the positive, right? It's easier to look at companies and say, this company is stuck and they're in big honking trouble if they don't figure out how to, in particular, the biggest problem is how do you extract information from your subject matter experts in a way that doesn't make them panic, make them feel like they're in, competition. So, I think that there's quite a lot of government contractors, especially in the engineering. There's a lot of people in the architecture space, especially in aerospace, that are really kind of up and coming on the front of this. I've done a lot with AAE, which is airport executives. And really over the past 10 years, I've been working with them, and they're really good about this idea of building in, what's it going to look like in order for the airport to sustain? What's that going to look like? Who do you have to have? And it's not just about succession planning, right? It's about making sure that you've equipped people to be good leaders. And so I'd say, any organization has the ability to do this, but I'd say your intentionality is what makes it different. Again, I'm like trying to pull names of everybody's a freaking acronym, right? That I work with. Everybody's some sort of letters, so they're all blending together in my acronym head. But there's quite a few that I've worked with, especially over the course of this past year, that I've thought, wow, they're really, really crushing it. But almost always, what makes them really crush it for me is they've got a leadership development program in place, and that the leadership development program not only just looks at hard skills, but it's soft skill development. So it's things like listening more effectively, conflict resolution, time management, how do you self-regulate, self-manage, financial programs in place, right? Those are the ones that I would say are out there crushing the generation game right now, is ones that understand that if you don't get skills into the next generation, then it's gonna fall apart, because we haven't taught them. We haven't taught them in the same way that people were taught previously. So, everybody's just doing the best they can. But easily I would say those are a few of the ones that I think are killing it. The bigger a company gets, in my opinion, the harder it gets for them to do this, for them to be able to do the generational stuff well, because they do have a tendency to get very focused in on the bottom line. And so, honestly, it's probably more of the small organizations that I deal with every day that are really thinking about making sure that they've got breadth, right? That they've got lots of people from different generations that it could all step into positions at any given time. That they're not just handpicking someone who looks like them, acts like them, walks like them, and then that's going to be my legacy into the company. They're looking for breadth. Let's get more leaders, and then we'll figure out who's going to be the right pick for that. And that to me is probably the biggest sign of health in an organization.
And based on what you were saying before too, Kristin, so, obviously the boomers aren't going to be able to work forever. And I love working with older people because there's just something about it. Just the knowledge that they can share with you.
What they've experienced.
Exactly. And then, for all of us, right, as Gen Xers, I didn't know that so many people in their mid to late 50s are really looking at, like, what is our plan to retire? I will raise my hand. I'm one of those thinking, gosh, how much longer? And I'm so excited. So we really do have to tap into and support and help the Millennial and Gen Z generations to, grow into good leaders.
Yeah.
Well, there's a little sliver of the millennials
that's who's going to run the country.
Yeah, exactly. There's a little sliver. They're called the elder millennials. They're between about 33 and 39 right now in 2025. And that's going to be the next leaders of the country. They're huge on the population swell. They're getting money earlier in their careers now because they're hitting mid-career. And they've lived at the crossroads. They've lived into a digital and an analog world. They've had boomer bosses that have given them amazing advice. And their 3-year-old can already work their computer better than they can right now. They live at a crossroads where they can see multiple areas. So they're going to really be the ones who are going to go for it. But a lot of people are not. They're not even looking at them right now. They're not even looking at their 37-year-old and saying, oh my God, could this person legitimately be the CEO in the next 5 to 6 years? Because the answer to that is absolutely yes, they could.
Yeah.
They absolutely could. As those boomers shift up, Gen Xers who are significantly smaller, we're like half the size. We're gonna shift up into those top positions, but only for a few years, because again, my goal is to get out with the most money in my 401k and the least amount of people I'm in charge of. So you're gonna see a lot of turnover that's gonna happen for a few years at the top. And so the more that you can get those solid people, those millennials and those elder millennials moving into upper positions earlier, the more solid ground your company will stand on as the transition happens.
Yeah, smart.
No,
and even if you're
really
an entrepreneur, like if you want to continue to maybe have a little bit of a footprint in your business, look at those millennials
100%.
To see who you can kind of groom into. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, no. Kristin, what advice do you give for like resolving generational conflict? Because sometimes that comes up, like, sometimes the millennials and the Gen Zs will look at, especially things that have been accepted as societal norms. Sometimes that can create a real rub, right? Because we are still learning. It is still, you look at the boomers and the Gen X, we did grow up in a different time, and there were things that were more acceptable. Doesn't mean they're right. It just means they were acceptable. But that can a lot of times create that rub between the generations as well. What's your guidance on like that piece of it too? Like, how do you resolve that conflict?
Yeah, a lot of it for me comes down to understanding the why, and again having those free flows of conversation. So, like you were talking about, one of the big differences. Like, I'll just give you an example. There's 2 big places that I see a lot of conflict happen between the younger generations and the older generations in almost every workplace. And that's around time management and conflict resolution. And so what you've got to understand is that in many ways, the younger generation just hasn't been exposed to the skills associated with that. So I'll just use a good example here. So like when you used to go outside and play, right? You had one rule about when you're supposed to come home, and that was when the street lights came on. And so, but actually what happened is you learned a ton about time management at 6, 7, 8 years of age, because you had complete and utter freedom and a hard deadline with some level of consequence. And so, you think about, like, you learn that streetlights come on in the winter at a different time than they come on in the summer. So you can't just look at your little Swatch watch, right, and know what time to be somewhere. Or that riding your bike to Linda's house takes a different amount of time than riding your bike to Cindy's house. Even if it looks the same, Cindy's got a hill, and I'll have to pedal up that hill. And so I have to think about that. You learned how to buffer it. Buffer your time. Do you guys remember when there was a Doberman loose in every neighborhood in America in the 90s? I don't know where all the Dobermans went, right? But like, you started learning, what do you do if the wild dog gets out? You have to check, you still have to be home when the streetlights are on. And the bottom line is, nobody teaches kids any of this. We run every single second of their day. An adult runs their whole day. An adult runs their whole evening, right? We take them to activities. We tell them when they need to eat a snack because we know that they'll be hungry, because we know they're not going to eat for another 3 hours. They have no idea the world's even spinning, right? Then we go home and we say, it's dinner time, it's homework time, it's screen time, it's shower time. And if you don't get off the internet when I tell you to, there's an app that will shut off the whole phone. So when exactly is anyone learning anything about time? They're not. So what happens is, you've got young people who are brilliant at doing the areas that they do, but they don't have any time management skills. And so the people whose jobs depend on you meeting your time and your deadlines are absolutely enraged at the fact that you can't do this. But they forget that they've never even been given the chance to practice it, right? So this idea of getting skills into people is a massive idea. You don't know what you don't know, and you're expecting people to know and do things. They're breaking social rules that they don't even know are your social rules. So I think a lot of it has to do with having those open conversations and being able to say, like, I don't know why, Linda, but for some reason, time management really gets on my nerves. Can you tell me a little bit about where your time management strategy is coming from? If you can have that conversation and they're like, I don't have a strategy. Okay, well, then let's get you one. right? But we don't have any of those conversations. And then also that side of conflict resolution, in particular, you have to remember that when something like social media came out, right? And now if I don't like what you have to say, I can just block you and I never have to see anything you say. Right? I can read one article and Google will hit me with that article and that information for as long as I keep reading those articles. And so what's happened is it's made it very easy for people to just not even engage in any kind of conflict resolution. And I think that's part of why people's ghosting rates are so high. If you're a stranger, then what do I care if you're mad that I didn't show up? You're just a stranger to me anyway. And so it's a lack of skill. It's not because they don't want to be able to do it. They haven't been taught how to do it. If I come in and negotiate every time you get in trouble with your teacher and I, as your parent, come in and I talk to the teacher and I resolve the problem, then what are you as a student learning at all about resolving your own problem? And that's the majority of what happens today. And then we expect them to go and be 20 years old and magically know how to do that with everybody at all different ages. And they just haven't gotten the skills. We just haven't taught it to them.
Really good point.
True. Even when we send them off to college, we're like, okay, you're 18, you're an adult now, so you should just know these things.
They don't.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
they
a
think
really
things
good
like,
point.
they'll think that, well, I got it in on time, right? They'll think, well, I got the paper in on time, so I must have good time management. No, you started the paper at 3:00 in the morning. You have no idea what you're actually capable of doing. You don't know how to not burn yourself out and your stress system out. That's not living, right? That's not time management. That's making it. And I think as we've done that and we glorify procrastination and we tell people, hey, stay up until 3:00 in the morning and game with your friends. And then, just grab a little nap in the middle of the day at work. No, while nobody's looking. Like that's all time management. And if we were to teach people, right, and teach about how it would make their life better as a whole, then they'd be much more apt to do it. But now we just say, I'm going to write you up, right? I'm going to punish you if you don't do it. And they don't respond to punishment the same way.
Yeah.
Head back down to mama's basement whenever they
do
darn
not
well want
respond
to.
to punishment.
Right.
Yeah. That is so true. Oh my goodness. This is why I love talking to Kristin, because it's just such real talk, and it's just like it does, it makes you it makes you look at it and go, holy shit, you're right. I didn't even think about it through that lens, but you're absolutely right. We created exactly what we have, and then we're mad about it because it's like, well, how come you don't know all these things? How come you can't do all these things? Well, we didn't teach you. So that's such a great point. I just love it.
Yeah.
Instead of having some grace and being curious, we just get upset and want to write people up. Yeah.
That's exactly right.
100%.
And they're very non-responsive.
So non-responsive. It drives me crazy. It is one of my big pet peeves too. It's like you cannot just ignore my ask of you because you think, I'm like, how am I supposed to know if you're actually doing it or you're following up on it? You can't just ignore me.
Yeah.
But again, drives me crazy where like I would not even think about ignoring them. Yeah.
But it's down to conflict resolution, right?
So true.
And again, and the other thing is that tech makes it so easy for you can avoid the conversation, right? Hope it goes away. I found that I would run that into my students quite a lot, where they'd say, I hope it goes away. And then when I did challenge them about it, they'd say, they would say, oh, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I never even got that email, right? They had a tech excuse on the back end. They had a way to be able to excuse whatever it was, and just flat lie to my face. And so, like I had to set a rule with my own children where I said, if I text you, you freaking respond because I pay that bill. And so if you can't be bothered to reply to the phone that I pay for, then I'll just get rid of the paying for thing. But it's difficult, right? It's difficult for us to do that because again, they don't want it. And another thing you've got to remember about, especially the Gen Zs and the new Gen Alphas that are coming in, is, they're very conscious of their social image, right? How they're being portrayed. And we find that quite a lot this is a generation that takes 60 pictures to post one, right? And so this idea of having to admit out loud to my boss that I don't know how to do something, or that I'm afraid to do it, or that the last time I did this, it went horribly wrong. And so, I don't want you to yell at me again and get in trouble. The idea that you'd have to say that for them, saying nothing is significantly better than taking the chance. And I find that that's why quite a few of them have failure to launch, right? Is that it's the idea of Gen Xers, baby boomers were told, you do it scared, right? It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. The bills have to be paid. The food has to be made. Do it scared. And now you've got a generation of people that is genuinely scared about a lot of things, and they're not quite sure how to express that in a way that doesn't make them lose face.
That's a really good point. Yeah. It's always like this self-reflection side of it to try to remember, because leading or managing teams in today's world is so much more complex,
It is.
because you do have to take all those things into consideration, and you can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to that management or that leadership. Yeah.
Yep. And then
No,
you throw
that's
virtual
really
work teams in too.
Oh,
yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God, which just is completely
Another
complicated
level.
thing.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
No
No,
wonder
it's
you're
true.
called Gen Y, though, because you do keep going back to, whether you're saying it or not, Kristen,
Mhm.
you keep going back to ask why.
Yep.
Yeah.
Start to peel away at that onion, take a few minutes, do some self-reflection, and think about how they grew up. Think about how
Yeah.
I grew up. Think about how my mom grew up. It's very different.
Well, even when I do my presentation, it's very much like the first part of it is very much the idea of, once you figure out how you got the way that you got, and you'll start to see yourself more clearly, it gets a whole lot more easy for you to see other generations. But when you begin to see, and again, Americans don't like this idea that I can group you together in groups of 86 million people. That's not the individualistic culture way. So I find that a lot of people are like, oh, I'm not like those other people. And you're like, bull crap, you absolutely are. Right. So,
Yeah.
that's sort of the idea, is we're really resistant to the idea that we're maybe not as special as we think we are. And so that's one of the issues that you have part of it is you have to get honest with yourself that maybe you are a little less out there and wild in your own crazy diamond version. And a lot of people don't want to buy that. We want to think that we are the exception to every single possible rule. And I find that most people have no problem identifying with generations as long as you're talking about the positive part. And it's just the minute that I talk about anything negative that you're magically not like those people.
Yeah. No, it's so
How
true.
funny.
Yeah. No. I find myself doing that. I mean, I'll find myself forgetting when I'll hear it, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not how I do things. I'm
Uh-huh.
this way. But when I'm being honest with myself, and really look at and then I'm like, nope, Kristen's right. I'm doing exactly what, it's like not that different.
Having a Gen
So
Z
yeah,
or Gen X moment.
Gen X
Yep.
That's
moment.
right.
Exactly. No, so true. It is. No, I love this. Kristen, so this is wonderful, but I just want to, you are on another path right now. You're doing something really cool. You've got another project that you're working on, which probably applies really nicely to Gen Xers who are thinking about what their exit strategy is. Talk a little bit about this new thing that you're working on.
So you're talking about the Ask Kristen stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So, one of the things that and it's gotten a little pushed off in development simply because whenever you start looking at weird economics, your brain starts going, oh my God, do I want to spend this kind of money? But essentially what's happening is I'm working with an AI developer to put together an AI chatbot that would make it possible for you to be able to go into the chatbot and ask generational questions in real time, and then it would respond to you based on the information that I have, based on thinking about things in a new way. So that's the idea. You'd be able to plug in like your like PowerPoints, right? And be able to go and say, okay, fix this and tell me what would look better and how this would be better, and, more development. But from just a communication standpoint, the idea is to have a chatbot that would give you some information that you really need. We're definitely 2026 is definitely the GenWHY 2.0 kind of era. We're in the middle of filming, right? Looking at how we're going to film some online curriculum that people can potentially add to their learning management softwares. There's lots of stuff. People keep asking me when I'm going to write a book, and I'm like, when the heck do I have time to write a book? Y'all are hilarious. But
Just going to ask you that. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I would love to, right? I have lots to say. But it's just one of those, we have to find time when you're like, I'm next week, right? I'm in three different states in 1 week. It's kind of hard to sit down and write a book, but that's part of the 2.0 plan, right? Is to reduce those time, right? Reduce the amount of engagements and spend more time on getting some really quality engagement and tools out there to help people be able to communicate more effectively.
That'll be
I love
fun to
that.
watch.
Yeah. And now you
Yeah.
also have kind of a fun project that you're working on with your husband,
Oh yeah.
that kind of was born out of Italy, right? So tell
Yeah.
everybody about that, because
Okay.
I'm waiting for you to launch
Are you
that.
so
'Cause I want to
excited
learn
about
all
my
about
Italy
it.
stuff? So my
I am so excited about it.
grandparents, yeah, are Sicilian. Like, we know the name of the town. Actually, this is really very weird, but I don't know if you've ever heard of Frank Capra, the director of It's a Wonderful Life, but he's my great uncle. And so he was my grandmother's.
Wow.
Yeah, he's my grandmother's first cousin. So he wouldn't know me. He wouldn't have known me. But anyway, Bissaquino is where we're all from, and so I had visited there and just loved it. And I my long term plan is I'd really like to buy a house in well, I'd like to buy a villa, honestly, there, and be able to host people to come through and actually like see their small town, learn their heritage stuff, learn how to make cannolis that are regional to them, how to make a lot of the food, and just kind of reconnect with your family roots. But yeah, that's sort of the idea. I love that. I love the Sicilian lifestyle. They live in blocks of time, which is just amazing. The idea of, they carve out time for their friends, they carve out time for their family, they take a nap in the middle of the day so that they refresh, and it just, everything about that sounds amazing to me. But yeah, that's sort of the idea. I've already got one apartment that we're probably about to pull the trigger on, Linda, coming up here
All right.
in a little town called Aqualadrone, which is going to be about 10 miles away from, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Bridge of Messina, but they're finally connecting the boot of Italy to the soccer ball by land. It's always been by boat or air now. So they're about to do that. And Aqualadrone is the first town you hit when you get off the bridge. So hopefully that'll bring a lot of visitors and people through. But yeah, that's the plan. The exit strategy for me is to bask in the Sicilian sun and drink good wine and eat good food.
That
Love
sounds
it. Well, and
amazing.
you can tell that Kristin is a Gen Xer. Listen to all that hustle. She's got like 15 different things going on just so she can make her exit. So
Yep. Good for
I
you.
love it. Yes.
It's
No, Kristin,
inspiring.
thank you so much for carving a little time out for us. I
Sure.
mean, I know our listeners are going to
So
love
much
this
fun.
episode. I love it every time I get to hear you speak. And I learn something new every single time. And
Thank
so I
you.
really appreciate you taking time to jump on with us
Yeah.
and chat. So it was
Well, I
great to
appreciate it.
catch
Thanks
up.
for
So
having
much
me.
fun.
I hope everybody that's
Yeah.
listening has an amazing day, and that you go and have a good conversation around your dinner table with the people, right, that you love this weekend and tonight, and talk to them about how you think generations play across your family, your work, your what are some dynamics that you need to
Love
maybe
that.
learn to have better relationships just with the people across your family, and understand each other a little bit better.
But
Thank
such a
you.
great way to
Yeah.
end. Yeah. Well, thanks, Cyndi, always for being in the studio with me. And to our listeners out there, if you make sure you like and subscribe, and you can find us on all the major streaming services. And Cyndi and I you'll be seeing our website coming out soon too. So you'll
Yes.
be able to check it out at the Her Podcast
Love it.
website as well. So Her Resources Podcast is where you'll be able to find us. So thanks, everyone, and have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of the HR Her Resources podcast. We're so happy to have you with us on this journey. Music and production by Logan Misegadis of LJM Productions. We'd also like to thank our intern, Lauren Banas, for creating our logo and supporting our social media postings. If you'd like to connect with Logan or Lauren, you can find their information in the show notes. If you found value in our discussion and think someone else might as well, please follow, subscribe to our LinkedIn, and share with a friend. Until our next episode, please take care and continue to support one another.